Hello, welcome again to Benchwarmers as we get into August of 2020, which means we get into the school year, which means we get into high school sports again. And we are joined this week by the directors of the South Dakota and North Dakota High School Sports Associations. Matt Fetsch has been the North Dakota director since 2014. Dan Swartos has been the South Dakota director since 2017. We got them together to talk about the plan to return to high school sports this fall. All right, gentlemen, appreciate your time today amid a very busy season for you guys. You guys know each other well, though, don't you? Matt, kind of what is the history between you and Dan?
Well, Dan, I don't even know the year. They're starting to run together here, but I'm beginning year 7 in the office. I think Dan's been around for about half of those now, so we've talked to each other quite a bit over the past few years.
Dan, how much have you guys kind of leaned on each other coming up with your respective plans that you've come up with for the return now to high school sports?
Quite a bit. You know, our states have a lot in common, and you know, I'm going into my 4th year here at the office, and Matt was one that was my first year when I first started. He was one that helped me out a lot, and he's helped me a lot throughout this. We like to tell each other we're 2 of the younger ones in the country that have this job, so we lean on each other a lot, and gotten to know Matt and his family quite well, and just really enjoyed the partnership that we have between our states.
I think individual school districts are going to have the ability to decide whether they're going to have in-person learning. Do sports follow those individual school districts, or how is that going to work?
Yeah, in North Dakota, our return to play is very similar to return to education. That's a local school board decision as far as, number one, if they offer athletics and activities. And we're not naive. I think everyone's anticipating there will be disruption, not only with education, but with athletics and activities. And here in North Dakota, our state health department, our governor's office, along with my board of directors, have been very instrumental working together. And we feel very fortunate about that. And throughout the season, both educationally and athletic and activity, the local health units, we have 28 of them in our state that cover geographically our 171 member schools. So they'll be working very close to the local health unit level with those kind of decisions moving forward. But again, you know, a lot of us we're not medical experts like they are. So a lot of those decisions will defer to those local health units.
Pretty similar here in South Dakota. We've got schools that are doing hybrid models. We've got some schools that are offering online versions. You know, from our perspective, it's a local school decision. We've got some schools that are choosing to start all online, and to us, that's quite a bit different than a school being forced to shut down due to an increase in cases. So we'll be working with our state Department of Health quite a bit. I'm going to be part of the school response team with our Department of Health, to where if there's an outbreak in schools, we'll all be a part of that and talk through what their options are and work through that with the schools. But from our perspective, if a school is offering education, then they have the opportunity to participate in athletics and fine arts activities.
All right. Just from a personal standpoint, is this as slippery of an issue as you guys have ever dealt with? I mean, you can lay out perfect plans and something might change a day later. There's just no simple answers to anything in this, is there? Matt?
No, not at all. And it's being involved in education for our professional careers. It's kind of the opposite of everything we do, where you kind of have total control of everything, and you have all your scenarios laid out. And on the other hand, when you know, we're part of tournament management or just administration in general, you know, whether it's a state basketball tournament or whatever the event is, in the back of my mind, and maybe it's my personality, I'm always hoping the worst doesn't happen, and what could be the worst thing that happens. And really, I realized I had no idea what that was until March 13th of 2020. We found that out in a hurry, but it just kind of by nature helps a little bit. But yeah, I think all of us know that everything's out of our control.
Yeah, we had a good example of this last week. We had approved our guidance on Wednesday, and then Thursday the CDC came out with all new guidelines for schools opening. So we changed a lot of our forms, and you know, from the beginning when we put our task force together, one of the first things we talked about is that it needs to be a living document, and it needs to be something that's that we can adjust, and we can adjust quickly as situations change. But like Matt said, a lot of what we do often in a normal year with tournaments is adapt to changes on the fly and make things work however we can make them work. So this is a pretty extreme version of that, but it is something that we deal with often, just as the nature of the job.
All right, I think this is a line from the North Dakota Guideline Report that mitigation strategies should be aimed at reducing the likelihood of a person's respiratory droplets coming into contact with another person. We're trying to stop the spread of saliva in all of this. Is that a simple way for people to kind of understand what we're trying to do with all of these plans,
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of it. And a lot of our references hinge on recommendations for who should be masked, et cetera. And again, our local health units and schools have been very active with that, where I think a lot of, particularly our larger schools, it's almost a foregone conclusion that everyone will be masked, and how that carries over into contests and similar to our crowd restriction. That's probably the number one question we get. Can fans come to the games? And so much of that hinges on where we're at as a state. In North Dakota, we have certain color-coded risk levels. Right now, we're classified as low risk. Our governor says we're probably closer to moderate than we are to the lowest level of the new normal. So we're following that, because whatever phase we're in is going to heavily dictate who's allowed to attend games. So something we'll be monitoring closely. And our tell you what, our athletic administrators have been outstanding and proactive, and they're you talk about being ready for every scenario, and that's what they've been focusing their time on, and I commend them for that. Some of the things they're inquiring about, haven't even necessarily been talked about a whole lot by any committee or group, but they're great ideas and something that probably will be talked about in the very near future.
All right, and Dan, Matt touched on the attendance part. People want to come watch volleyball and watch their kids play football and all these other sports that are going to happen in the fall. But I think South Dakota put out recommendations of kind of a similar nature of, if this is the level, the threat level, so to speak, in the state, this can be the attendance level at athletic events. Is that kind of how it's laid out?
Yeah, what we really wanted schools to do was to put something in place, and so that when those decisions come up, that you take the emotion out of it. They can be emotional decisions, and we wanted them to come up with something that works for where they're at. And we put out an example of a tiered model of attendance based on those 7 and 14-day trends within their communities and their counties, on new cases, active cases, hospitalizations, just looking at what's going on there and making decisions based on that. So we put an example out, and we really wanted, the goal of that was to get schools to have something in place prior to the season that they could refer to when things get heated and when they're in the middle of these discussions. So we did recommend that, and we also wanted our schools, conferences to get together and try to come up with similar policies so that parents going to away games knew what to expect. And for the most part, our schools have been really good about doing that.
Dan, has this kind of almost been a strengthening between the association and the member schools?
Yeah. I mean, we have to be able to communicate with each other, and everyone comes at it from a little different perspective. But I think it was good in having the groups look at it from each other's perspective, and I think that helped quite a bit. So the process we went through with this, and just going through this together, I think it has strengthened, the ties between us and our member schools.
Yeah. All right. You guys have put a plan out there for the best. We will hope for the best. Hopefully we're talking to you in a month and we're playing football and everything else, and things are good. Thank you for all your work, and appreciate the time, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it so much. Thank you. Have a good week. And you can go to the respective websites to find the guidance and recommendations for South Dakota and the return to competition guidelines for the state of North Dakota. We got some reaction from our Midco High School reporters coming up. Some of the big questions in South Dakota with Jason Andera coming up next. Welcome back to Benchwarmers. High school sports, as we have heard, have gotten the green light in the Dakotas to go ahead as scheduled this fall. Practices are already getting started this week. Jason Andera is going to be all over high school sports for Midco Sports Network. Football games are supposed to start August 21st in South Dakota. You've heard the directors talk about the plan to get back to athletics. What are your thoughts on this? Do you have any doubt in your mind that kids should be playing high school sports this fall?
I mean, doubt's a big word, and yes, everybody has a little bit of doubt, whether this is worth the risk. But sports are good, and I think they are valuable enough to make every attempt possible to make this happen. But I think the kids have some doubt too. I mean, I think the kids playing the sports maybe not totally 100% bought in because they're thinking this might last a couple weeks, this might not make it to the end of the season. There's a lot of questions here, Tom.
Yeah, a lot of interesting dynamics that way mentally for sure. And it's not just sports, band, other activities. You have a daughter in band that has some of these feelings you're talking about.
That's exactly where, she's thinking, hey, I'm not sure if we're going to make it through the whole season. And of course, they get together in groups of hundreds. So it's really a dangerous activity when you're blowing air on each other. There's a lot of people affected by this, and I feel bad for the 2020 class, but I also feel bad for this 2021 class that has so many questions going into the year.
All right, when we get sports going, football, volleyball, those kinds of things, it's going to be a little different for you trying to cover these things.
Yeah.
What are you planning on making some changes maybe in the way you cover it?
Well, starting with, we're going to be calling a lot of the games right from the studio in here, which is an advantage we have at Midco Sports Network, but we're not going to be at the games as often, so covering them will be a little bit different that way. Hopefully we can still talk to the players and talk to the coaches, though, and not have that go down in any way. I mean, maybe some more Zooms and less one-on-ones, but we'll try to keep the individual coverage coming. And
we had the All-Star experience at the Pentagon this past weekend. You and I covered it from here while the games were going on over there, like you said. But those kids and those coaches were more than ready physically and ready to get back at it, even with all the questions that we have.
I'll tell you what, it's true. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. I think everybody appreciated the value of sports. The players out there, the coaches out there, the broadcasters, the fans, the parents, everybody was a little bit more appreciative having sports back. And I think that's going to continue. That's going to be the theme. We're all going to appreciate sports more coming up this fall.
And you're going forward as well. You have football and volleyball previews coming up.
Can't wait. Jody and I are going to be working on some football and volleyball. We got preview night set for a couple weeks from now.
All right. Speaking of North Dakota, Jody Norstedt will join us next. Appreciate it, Jandy. We'll talk to you soon. All right, including some shakeups in North Dakota high school football. Jody Norstedt will join us next.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Avera Orthopedics.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers, high school sports in the Dakotas. Getting the green light to go ahead is scheduled this fall. Practice is getting started. Football set to start on August 21st in North Dakota, as it is in South Dakota. Jody Norstedt is our guy in North Dakota and West Fargo, going to be all over it for Midco Sports Network. Jode, weird times, we all know that, but we asked Jandy this. Any doubt in your mind that it is the right decision for kids to get back and play high school sports coming up this fall?
I think it's right to give it a try and just see, Tom, and give these kids an opportunity. Give them a little bit of hope, because we saw what happened last year in the winter, ending the state tournaments in basketball right in the middle of them, and then taking away a spring season for a lot of these student athletes. So giving them that hope and that opportunity, I like that. But if it starts getting out of hand with a lot of people testing positive and more spread in these communities, I don't think you have much of a choice. I think you're going to need to shut it down. I think these players are well aware of that, and coaches are well aware of that, and parents. But I like to see them give these kids the hope that they deserve here in their a lot of them their senior year.
Yeah, good answer to that question, buddy. Some schedules, though, have already changed, have they not, as far as the biggest classes in North Dakota?
Yeah, so in high school volleyball, there will be no in-season tournaments, so no East versus West in the middle of the season or early in the season. And then the EDC versus the WDA in football. Usually it's the first 2 weeks that we get to see those crossover matchups. So like good matchups like, I don't know, a Century versus a Davies, or you get a West Fargo versus a Bismarck High. Those matchups aren't going to happen. The schedules have been reshuffled. The WDA is actually going to go with, I think, 1 through 2, and then they're going to have a bye in week 3 and then byes throughout the season. EDC is going to do the same things with a couple byes throughout the season, but they will be conference only which isn't that huge of a deal. I think the coaches will always tell you that they treat those 2 weeks against the non-conference opponent as almost a preseason to get their rosters kind of set up, because you know that your in-conference games are the only thing that matters once you get seeded for the state tournament.
All right, and practices get started later this week for the lower classes and next week for the big classes?
Yeah, everything gets rolling actually next week on Monday, so we'll see all the classes get going for practices. A lot of teams are still holding camps and even OTA type things this week, but it's going to be interesting to see how well conditioned these athletes are as far as getting ready for a season. And I think those experienced teams, the teams with depth are going to have an advantage here early on. All
right, and you and Jandy are working on some previews. I think some football together. What are you working on for high school previews?
Yeah, August 19th, we get to roll out our fall previews. So 7 o'clock is the North Dakota High School football preview. South Dakota takes over at 7:30. Then volleyball, North and South Dakota at 8 o'clock. So we're going to have our top prospects, preseason rankings for all the classes. Should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it.
All right, Jody, we'll see you out there. Thanks, man.
All right, thanks, Tom.
All right, up next, if you run a block or a mile or a marathon, you might as well do it right. Analyze your stride, high-tech style. That story is coming up next. Welcome back. If the tires on your car are not aligned, it's going to wear out your tires and maybe damage the rest of the vehicle. Same thing in running, right? You can check it out with a stride analysis, though. Elena Lanson tries the technology with Derek Ferley from Avera Sports.
The Stride Lab allows runners to analyze their technique by going through a series of different intervals while using state-of-the-art equipment.
The treadmill that we've got is what's called an instrumented treadmill. So that basically means that every time your foot hits the ground, or hits the belt in this case, we're able to capture the impact that's associated with your foot strike. That's being integrated with a series of cameras so that we can take either a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional view of your running stride. And then from there, we can really break down your running mechanics and see how efficient you are and whether you're more prone, for example, to have some sort of running-related injury.
And there's multiple different uses, like you said, injury. You can use it to figure out a therapy plan or just kind of see what their stride analysis would be to improve on your running. What different cases do you see in here?
Absolutely. It's probably 50-50 between the number of participants who have come in who want to just know what can I do to improve my running mechanics, and they're really people who are competitive runners and distance runners in particular, and they want to know, okay, what's wrong with my running stride? How can I get it better? How can I be more efficient? And then, of course, you've got your people who are coming back from an injury, and maybe their running mechanics was in part caused their injury. So they want to know, okay, if I change my running mechanics, will I be less likely to get injured? So those are really the two types of people we deal with the most.
He has his runners run at 3 different speeds, watching specific mechanics and analyzing the differences of the 3 major components.
When you look at somebody's running stride, just generally, you want to see, do they overstride? Do they bounce too much? And then lastly, are they excessively compliant? And compliance is going to be, okay, what do your hips do when you're fully weight bearing on one foot? Do you overstride? It's probably the number one predictor of whether or not somebody is going to end up with an injury. And what I mean by that is, when I get you to the point of foot strike, now if I dropped a line straight down from essentially your hip, your center of mass, and if I just dropped it straight down to the ground, you can see that your heel is in front of that would-be line. The distance in front of that would-be line is the amount that you would overstride. So at a slow speed, you don't really overstride too much. That's good. That's good. And so we look at those 3 things: overstriding, too much bounce, and excessive compliance. And if you demonstrate 1, 2, or all 3 of those things, then your chances of experiencing a running-related injury, especially with increased distances in running volume, they do tend to go up.
Increased speed is where you see these imperfections amplified and know what areas need to be corrected.
So there's just lots of fun information that we can glean from this. And so the one thing that I would definitely encourage you to do is we would want to work on your stride length, and I will guarantee you that by minimizing your stride length, you'll actually see a decrease in the impact forces you'll see better overall running mechanics, and you'll ultimately see increased efficiency, which will make your running more effortless.
This has been extremely helpful. I'm going to take a lot away from this, but are people able to sign up, come in during the week with you and just check out and see what they could do better?
Absolutely, yeah. As I said, we get a fair amount of runners who are healthy, and they just want to know how can they run maybe faster or more efficiently. And then, of course, there's those who I work more in concert with the physical therapist and try to figure out why they have the issues that they do from a running standpoint. So.
Awesome. Well, I was super excited for this. I know other people will be really excited to analyze their running stride. Derek, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, thank you guys. Coming up next, some hot gossip centered around the reality show The Bachelorette, and our first guest of the season here on this show on Benchwarmers, Dale Moss.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Avera Orthopedics.
A note before we go this week, back on June 3rd, former Brandon Valley High School and South Dakota State star Dale Moss was our guest on this show. And I don't know if any of this is true. I don't care. It's fabulous. But there are rumors floating all over the place that Moss has blown up the latest recording of the TV show The Bachelorette. Reports, if you want to call them that, are that Claire Crawley, the Bachelorette, has quit the show because she has fallen in love with Dale Moss. Is it true? Is it just hype for the show? We don't know. Moss could not even confirm that he was going to be a contestant on the show when we talked to him back in June. Hate to promote The Bachelorette, trust me, but very interesting what is going on right now concerning our guy, Dale Moss. Anyway, thanks to Matt Fetsch and Dan Swartos this week. We've got a Missouri Valley football preview coming up next week on Benchwarmers. See you then.